Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Beyond the Grant, Unlocking Tax Credits to Support Nonprofits. My name is Danielle Chahansky. I'm a partner here at Porty Brown, specializing in working with not-for-profits. I'll be facilitating today's webinar presented by Ryan Haggerty, who is a partner at SB Friedman Development Advisors. He specializes in tax credit finance, nonprofit real estate, and community develop, and has spent over 15 years advising clients on funding high impact real estate projects, assembling complex capital stacks that blend tax credits, public funding, private debt, and grants. Where he specifically focuses on working with the New Market Tax Credit Program, which he'll be presenting on today as well. We also have Barry Devine with Tri-Merit joining us. He is their Director of Energy Services and has spent more than 20 years advising clients on various specialty tax credit incentives, helping hundreds of companies successfully claim credits and saving them millions of dollars in these credits. He has extensive experience working with the credits and practices, including project management, developing processes, audit representation, software development, etc. We are super excited to have both of them join us and share their expertise with everyone today. With that, just a quick disclaimer. I'm not going to read this to you all, but it is up there on your screen. And a very quick agenda. We'll get started by going over the new market tax credits presented by Ryan. And then after Ryan concludes the meat of his presentation, we will move into the energy credits that Barry will be sharing with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to get started on talking about the new market tax credit.
Great, thanks Danielle, and thanks Porty Brown for convening this webinar this afternoon. Danielle, I believe for questions, folks can just enter the question into the chat and then, or the Q&A box. Is that correct?
That is correct. If you have any questions, please just enter them into the chat. We'll be monitoring it throughout. In the interest of time, if we don't end up getting to your question, we will follow up with everyone directly after the webinar. So please feel free to ask it regardless if you think you have time or not. Thank you for pointing that out.
Of course. All right, let's dive on into the new market tax credit. So as Danielle mentioned, a partner at SB Friedman based here in Chicago. My office is in the Loop. I consult nationally on the new market tax credits. My clients are primarily nonprofit organizations, food banks, YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, homeless service providers, et cetera, et cetera. So excited to be with all of you today. So just an overview of the new market tax credit program. It's a tax credit started in 2000. So there's a nice long track record of this program of over 25 years, really designed to promote economic development in lower income communities across the country. Over the last 25 years or so, over $138 billion of projects have been supported. Many of those, over 5,000 community facilities, a number of manufacturers, a wide variety of types of projects being funded by the new market tax credit. What does new markets mean for nonprofits, for projects? One is the monetary benefit. So new market tax credits really primarily for larger real estate projects and can subsidize up to 15 to 20% of a project cost as grant-like subsidy. So let's say $10 million project cost, $1.5 to $2 million could come from the new market tax credit as a grant-like subsidy. The second thing to mention on the new market tax credit before we get into details is there is compliance related to it. For real estate projects, what this means is having the rest of the funding available at the time of closing to access the new markets, and then being able to start construction are really the kind of key drivers of being able to access this funding tool. So high level, getting into some of the specifics, what types of organizations are benefiting from the new market tax credits? And for this audience today, I'll point out this is the types of projects that have been funded over the last couple of years: healthcare, FQHCs, behavioral health clinics, et cetera. 19% is a big chunk. And then community facilities, everything from a YMCA to a food bank, food pantry, youth center, after school programming, charter school, wide spectrum in that community bucket. Mixed use projects. A lot of these are kind of affordable housing driven development type projects where there's a kind of a mix of maybe first floor commercial space, maybe a health clinic on the first floor, and then upstairs is a affordable housing or mixed income housing. So wide type and variety of projects that can use new market tax credits. What do new market tax credit funders, what makes a good project for new market tax credits? First is the location of the project. As I mentioned, most of these are real estate driven projects, whether new construction, renovation of an existing facility or facilities. First is the location. So the project itself must be located in a low income community. This is based on census tract demographics. We have a link here on the slides to be able to geocode a project site to see if it qualifies for new market tax credits. That's a kind of a binary yes or no based on the demographics of the census tract. So that's when I'm talking to potential projects. That's always thing number one. Is the project located in the new markets eligible census tract? I've had clients over the years who they may not have this site yet, but know that new market tax credits would be a critical part of a capital fundraising effort. So they direct their broker, hey, here's the new market tax credit eligible areas. We want to limit ourselves to location sites, buildings in those communities that qualify for new market tax credits. So that's thing number one, just location. Thing number two is the impacts on low-income people. Not good enough to just be located in a low-income area. Need to provide direct benefits and be able to quantify those benefits to low-income people because of the project. That often takes two forms. One is just employees, how the jobs might be accessible to lower-income individuals, and then two, kind of direct services, so number of patients at a health clinic, number of students at a charter school, number of guests at a homeless services facility, be able to quantify the impact to low-income people. Can't build a kind of an office park that doesn't have direct benefits to low-income people, even if it's located in a new market eligible area. Third, this is pretty easy for the nonprofit community, being able to talk about the need for the new market subsidy, why this 15-20% subsidy will help a project get done sooner, or maybe add an extra exam room or two, or add solar to the roof because of the new market tax credit. Be able to describe the need and why this funding would kind of help the project get across the finish line and or be bigger, better than it otherwise would. Size for the new market tax credit, really to make the juice worth the squeeze. Typically we see kind of a minimum project cost, about $5 million, $6 million, and that can include hard cost, soft cost, site acquisition cost, FF&E, potentially some working capital. So there's ways to kind of gross up to 5 million, but kind of the sweet spot's probably 8 to 15 of project costs. I closed a deal with the Houston Food Bank a couple weeks ago. That was a $100+ million project, down to projects in the $6-7 million range. But that kind of 8 to 15, anything below 5, just the juice just isn't worth the squeeze, not worth the headache for organizations. Another kind of two things I kind of referenced earlier is just the financial readiness. So I like to view the new market tax credit as a match to other funding sources. So having the rest of the funding available to get a project built. You know, everybody likes to be last dollars in. The new markets, for a variety of compliance considerations, kind of really is the last dollars into a transaction. Then for these real estate projects, need to really be shovel ready or already under construction. What that typically means is building permit in hand, signed guaranteed maximum price contract with GC, site control, of course. So a number of kind of considerations to kind of be an attractive new markets deal to access this funding. What's involved with the new market tax credit? There's a lot of different parties here. So I wanted to describe kind of everybody's role and how it actually works. So it's a federal tax credit. U.S. Congress authorizes the Treasury Department, and within the Treasury Department, a division called the CDFI Fund, to administer the New Market Tax Credit Program. It's a permanent part of the tax code as of last year, so it's around for the foreseeable future. How this functionally happens is there's intermediaries called community development entities, or CDEs. They apply to the federal government to get tax credit allocations, and then they decide which projects to support with these tax credits. So there's probably 150 CDEs around the country. All the big banks have a subsidiary that's a CDE, JP Morgan, US Bank, PNC, Capital One. A lot of the community development financial institutions like an enterprise, a low-income investment fund, a IFF here in Illinois, are also CDEs. And then different municipalities have CDEs that the government, local governments control. My firm works with the city of Chicago, has a CDE called Chicago Development Fund that just does projects in the city of Chicago. So roughly 100, 150 different CDEs. There are different geographic priorities, and then different CDEs care about different types of missions. So some will only focus on healthcare projects, others will focus on community facilities more generally. So kind of a mix of the CDEs. The CDEs are kind of the crux of the New Market Tax Credit. Again, they're getting the tax credit allocations from the federal government and deciding which project, which nonprofit to support with those New Market allocations. I used the word intermediary for the CDE. Where the money's actually coming from is an investor, typically big bank, will basically buy the tax credits for a discount, and through that purchase of the tax credits to offset their tax liability, that generates that 15 to 20% subsidy that gets pushed down to the project. 15 to 20% of the total capital stack. The rest of the funds, like I mentioned, need to be available at the time of closing. There's a lot of flexibility on matching these projects. I'm closing a project today in Cleveland, Ohio. As a homeless services facility, a $30 million project that had 8 state, county, local city sources in that. Often nonprofit projects are doing a capital campaign with private philanthropic dollars. There's a lot of different mixing and matching of funding sources that basically can unlock the New Market Tax Credit. And many of the folks on the line right now would be the recipients of the New Market Tax Credit, the project itself, who actually get the benefit. We went through what makes an attractive project, the general mechanics of who's all involved, and then what the process looks like at a high level. So these are complicated transactions that often take 12 to 3, 4, 5 years to come together. Kind of first step, typically about a year out from when you're ready to start construction on a project, is kind of what we call the preliminary positioning, start marketing the project to community development entities. Where this typically starts is when you're at kind of the schematic level drawings with the architect, where there's a pathway of the fundraising. You know you're about 12 months out on whatever the project's going to be. Next stage is kind of assembling the deal. This takes 69 days, a couple months to get the term sheets, get the commitments of tax credits from both the CDE and then the investor who's buying those tax credits. So those kind of happen in lockstep. The scarce resource really is, of the tax credits, is really at the CDE level. And then there's a number of banks who are active in buying these tax credits from the CDE to drive the subsidy down to the projects. Then finally, there's a closing costs process involved, similar to a construction loan. 69 days, a lot of due diligence involved with putting the funding together on these deals. A lot of legal documents, as you can imagine. So we always say about a year out is when it really makes sense to start really digging into new markets. I've had clients that take a couple years, 3 years to come together, but kind of 1 year cycle is probably the most you'll need to access the new market tax credit. Getting into just the economics of these transactions, how we get to that 15 to 20% subsidy. Starting with the new market tax credit allocation amount at the top. So this is driven by the project costs. So like I mentioned, for real estate projects, that could include acquisition, hard costs, soft costs, furniture, fixtures, equipment, potentially some startup working capital for a new facility. Besides the new market tax credit allocation based on those project costs, that tax credit allocation generates a tax credit equal to 39% of the allocation amount. That is just what these tax credits are worth. That's just written to the IRS code. An investor buys those tax credit benefits, that $3.9 million, for a discount. Like I mentioned, the bank is basically purchasing the tax credits. Right now, the market's probably 77 to 80 cents, depending on the bank, depending on the part of the country we're in. So the bank is going to put in $3 million up front into the deal. That generates a $3.9 million tax credit that's spread over a 7-year compliance period. This spread between the 3.9 and 3,081,000 they buy the tax credit for, that's their return. That's their economic motivation for being in the deal, that spread. The CDE, the group who's providing the tax credit allocation to the transaction, they charge upfront fees, ongoing fees, there's legal accounting expenses involved. Fortunately for the project, you're not writing a check for those specific costs. It's netted out of that equity from the tax credit investor, that $3 million. So we add up all the various costs and fees. The net to the project is that 15 to 20%, that $1.9 million. So whenever I have these conversations with different folks about the new market tax credit, there are lots of fees. It is what it is. There's ways to kind of try skinning these up as much as we can, but like to just be transparent on the front end on kind of the economics and how these deals come together. Kind of connecting the various entities again. In the CDFI fund, a division of the Treasury Department, they allocate tax credits to those CDEs who are providing them to a deal. An investor, big bank, Capital One, Chase, US Bank, PNC, they buy the tax credits for a discount. That 3.9 tax credit benefit, buying them up front for $3 million. What that actually looks like is they're putting equity into the CDE, $3 million amount for $3.9 million tax credit benefit. The CDE then turns around and pushes that down to the project. That's how the benefit gets to the organization. I use this funnel chart sometimes. There's a lot of intermediary legal entities involved. A way to think about it is a funnel, $10 million transaction, kind of keeping the numbers the same. $8 million would come from the project sponsor between grant sources, loan proceeds, public grants, private grants, whatever they may be, combined with the subsidy from the new market tax credits, flows through the investor, the CDE, down to the project. So some folks like this structure, some don't, the visual here, but a way to think about it as well. I'm going to run through just a couple case studies from around the country. Not going to go super depth, so Barry has enough time to present on the energy tax credits, but just to get some folks thinking about different possibilities for the new market tax credits. These are all different projects that have used new markets to support their new facilities or expanded facilities. First is a health clinic and federally qualified health center in Miami Gardens, just north of the city of Miami, called Jesse Trice. They built a new 15,000 square foot clinic that generated about $1.8 million of subsidy from the new market tax credit. They took out a loan facility from the local Florida Community Loan Fund to kind of be the match for the new market tax credit and built a new facility with the new markets. A lot of boys and girls clubs around the country have used new market tax credits. I worked on a boys and girls club in Metro Atlanta, new 25,000 square foot facility that utilized $10 million of new market tax credits. This was really focused on expanding to the teen population. So a lot of cool arts programming in this facility. They had a recording studio, a whole host of kind of bells and whistles, really trying to benefit lower income teens in the city of Atlanta. A school facility up in Waukegan, just north of here. Cristo Rey, they're a network of independent Jesuit high schools focused on low-income students. They have a really innovative work-study model. This group did a couple new markets transactions. They took a former Kmart, abandoned, shuttered Kmart, and converted it into a school. And they received $28 million in new market tax credit allocation. In two separate transactions, they basically phased the build out of the school over multiple years and was able to go to get new market tax credit 2 times. Mentioned mixed use developments can be used for new market tax credits. So this is a project down in Atlanta called Quest Heritage Village, an existing building that was vacant for a number of years that they converted into 102 affordable housing units upstairs for formerly homeless individuals, so all very, very low income. And then the ground level had a space for the Urban League of Greater Atlanta to provide some workforce training. Mercy Care, a local federally qualified health center, took some space. Then Fulton County Behavioral Health provided behavioral health services on site. There's a $35 million transaction. It's netted about $7 million for the new markets. They combined that with a whole host of other funding sources to keep the project very, very affordable for exclusively formerly homeless individuals. Mentioned food banks. Have done probably 12, 14 different food banks around the country are doing new facilities, from $10 million facility up to, like I mentioned, $100+ million facility in Houston. Food Bank of the Rockies, they actually did 3 new markets transactions. This is one of their new markets deals for a new facility in Aurora, just outside the city of Denver. They also had a facility included a Meals on Wheels programming on site too, that had kind of Meals on Wheels and Food Bank of the Rockies use new market tax credits. So that was my quick overview of the new market tax credit program. I see one question in the chat that I'm happy to answer before turning it over to Barry. What types of funding sources would not be compatible with the new market tax credit was a question we received. I think a couple different things. One, tax-exempt bonds and new market tax credits don't play nicely together. So that's one thing to consider. Just on the rest of the funding, that couldn't be a tax-exempt bond, or it becomes very complicated. So there'd be a lot of things to think about there. And then for mixed use developments, low income housing tax credits and the new market tax credit don't play nicely together. So the workaround there is, if you're using LIHTC low income housing tax credits, you can kind of condo it out where you have just a housing piece funded by the low income housing tax credit, and then the new market tax credit would fund the non-housing piece of the facility. Those are 2 that come to mind. There's a lot of flexibility with how other funding sources are structured, though, to make it work with the market tax credit. With that, I want to leave enough time for Barry to go over his part of the presentation today. So Barry, turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. That was excellent. Yeah, just a couple takeaways. The one big, beautiful bill making the new, the tax credit, housing tax credit permanent seemed like big news for that program. And then also how close to home some of these projects can actually be. Like I saw, the Denver Broncos Stadium, I live right down the street from it. So really seeing it transpire in the communities is pretty awesome. So thank you for doing that. I actually learned a lot. So we're going to switch over to renewable energy tax credits for not-for-profits. And so just to kind of set the stage on what you should be thinking about, like any one of these buildings, right, as a school, church, hospital, food bank, if they're investing in renewable energy, which could be putting a solar panel on the roof, putting in battery storage for backup, putting in geothermal heat pumps, putting in ice chillers to make ice at night, and so thermal energy storage and cool during the day, any of these other, assets that could be that they could spend money on any of these buildings are what generate a tax credit. And for the not-for-profits, they're called applicable entities, the tax credit is actually refundable. So the check comes back from the government. So I'm going to walk through how that works. There's two big pieces of legislation. End of 2022, the one big beautiful bill. The end of 2022 was the Inflation Reduction Act, and then the one big beautiful bill. The Inflation Reduction Act is what created elective pay. So, energy tax credits are not anything new. We've had energy tax credits, solar and wind and other technologies for 20 years. But what happened with the Inflation Reduction Act, end of 22, starting in 23, is the monetization of the credits. So if you're for profit, you can use the credit. If you generate the credit, you can either use it or you can sell it. That's called transferability. That's on the right column here. If you are an applicable entity, which is a not-for-profit, municipality, government, tribal, any non-tax paying entity, you can use what's called elective pay, and that means it is a refundable tax credit. So with the, we're Tri-Merit's hosting a Bridge the Gap conference right now this week, and one of the booths is the IRS. That's how serious the IRS is. They have liaisons, they have community liaisons that are out there to help not-for-profits and entities and people like us just to spread the word on if you're going to invest in renewable energy, you can get the check refunded. So it's a very, very powerful mechanism for putting these assets in place. And we'll go over the certain technologies now or what to look for, what it might look like. But I think, the intent of Congress and the law supported by both, radically different administrations is, what good is a tax credit if it doesn't actually save money, if it doesn't get to the hands of the taxpayer? So, I've been doing the research and development tax credit for 20 years, and it's good for some, not good for others. If you're not taxable, if you're not a startup, there might be limitations in the usability of it. So that's why the government came up with, hey, let's make sure these tax credits actually monetizable. So what to look for? Most of the clients that we have are solar is very, very, very popular. Probably the most one we have are solar. Energy is probably second. There's several types of energy. There's hydrogen, which we haven't had come online yet for us, but thermal energy storage and battery storage. So electrical energy storage. So any type of battery backup. Thermal energy storage could be a couple of different, that's like a chiller and stuff like that. We do a lot of geothermal. Geothermal is one of our favorites. So a lot of schools, they want to, lower their costs, and you can do geothermal heat pumps. We have a couple combined heat and power and some other projects, but those are the types of projects to look for that your not-for-profit might actually invest in. So the rules and the size, we'll do that quickly, and then we'll just kind of cut to the chase and get to some examples here. There's a lot of rules, and the rules change depending on what year, depends on the size, depends on beginning of construction, begins on placed in service. There's a lot of different factors on what your tax credit amount will actually be. But the way to calculate the credit is you'll get your complete cost spend, your capital cost. And then from your complete capital cost, you'll get your qualified basis. So if you're doing solar and you spend, $1 million on solar, most of it will qualify unless there's, redoing the roof or doing some shingles or, fencing. Most of that will qualify. Geothermal, you have to go through and get the qualified cost. But at the end of the day, whatever your capital spend is, whatever is considered qualified for the renewable energy asset is what you're going to multiply the percentages by for the credit. So any credit under 1 megawatt is automatically 30%. Any credit over 1 megawatt is subject to prevailing wage and apprenticeship rules. If you don't meet PWA, you're going to have a 6% credit. If you do meet prevailing wage, you get a 30% credit. So if you spend $1 million on a solar panel under 1 megawatt, you got a 30% credit. There's a few bonus adders. One of them is domestic content. This is all onshoring, reshoring, buy American, there's a domestic content analysis you do. It's a ratio of the percentage of your project, of the components of the project. If they're domestically sourced, you can get another 10% adder, and it's 10% multiplied by that qualified basis. So it gets pretty lucrative at the end of the day. If you get domestic content, you're at 40%. There's another one, if you're in an energy community, which is a little bit of a binary decision as well. If you're in the community with a couple certain other parameters, you get another 10%. So you could be at 50% of your cost. So if you spend $1 million on a solar panel, you're currently at a $500,000 credit. There is low income community as well. So this is a bonus adder. This is for wind and solar only. But if you're in a certain economic zone, you can get another 10 or potentially 20%. So the credit is somewhere between 30 and 70% of your capital costs. So it's very, very, very lucrative credits. Very, very lucrative credits. There are, if you're a large not-for-profit, you are starting at 25, 24, there's a haircut, or 25, 26 and forward. There's a haircut if you don't meet domestic content or you need to get an exception in order to have the full 30% credit. So that's kind of the calculation of it. So, I'm just going to kind of use maybe 30% as a factor. So if you're spending $1 million, it's 300,000, 10 million, 3 million. So we can kind of use that going forward on some of our examples. But the process is, first, if you're an applicable entity, U.S. territories, agencies, instrumentalities, rural co-ops, excuse me, any tax exempt organization is an applicable entity and can qualify for elective pay. So there's a process. There is an IRS portal registration. So every single asset that wants to have the refund mechanism through elective pay, you have to apply through a separate IRS portal and receive a registration number for that asset. So if you have a solar panel and you are placing in service and construction's happening, simultaneously, you have to go in, register with the IRS. They give you that registration number, and then there'll be a tax form to calculate the credit based on technology. Most of them will be a 3468 because that'll be, wind and solar and geo and all these other technologies. There might be a couple different forms if it's a different technology. But at the end of the day, these are going to flow through, and this is where I lose most of the not-for-profit clients. It flows through a 3800, which is a general business tax form. But on that general business tax form is when the taxpayer says, I am a not-for-profit entity on the 3800, and then you'll move to the 990T, and I'll show you how that works in just a minute. So what we're found is most of the time, for the last 20 years, we've been doing research and development. We do cost segregation studies. We did the 179D energy efficient commercial building deduction. So if you're not-for-profit, you could allocate the deduction. So most of our work has been look back work. You finished the year. What did you spend money on? Did you qualify for a credit? So now it seems we're being pulled way more to the beginning of these, because just like Ryan was saying, like what's the right timing to get in front of your tax credit? Even on these, we're being pulled in the beginning to talk about the monetization determination. So if there is tax exempt bond financing, that also does not play well with these. If there's grants, if there's funding, if there's investors, if there's, a board that needs to make a decision on, what is our return on investment just for having renewable energy and reducing our energy costs, but also what's our return on investment? A lot of not-for-profits will come to the table and say, we heard we could get a 30% credit, or 40% or 50%. Is that true? Does it work? How does it work, and when do we see it? So we do a lot of work in the front end of these projects, and just sitting with the architects, designers, engineers, and just kind of reassuring the not-for-profit entity that, yes, this does qualify, and here's your timeline. And, we can kind of estimate when you can file the 990T to receive the check. So the administration, due diligence, and the monetization. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll come to the table and say, if you are thinking about this project, you are in an energy community, Domestic content could be possible depending on the solar installer and the components. Low income, so we could, just put a proposal in the beginning to, help the clients understand what the economic impact is. So I have a lot of examples in here. We do this one first. This is a small church we did in Texas. They put, they spent $550,000 on solar on the church. So the eligible project was 500,000. They got the 30% because they're under 1 megawatt. They did not meet domestic content. They did meet energy community and did not have a negative tax-exempt bond financing adjustment. So they filed the 990T and they received a check for $220,000. So the cash comes as tax-free cash. So needless to say, very, very happy, very, very happy client, which is, a little bit, smaller dollars. So here is, there's two types of monetization. Code section 6417 is where you find all of the elective pay for the not-for-profits. 6418 is where the for-profits go to transfer sell the credit in the market. There's a marketplace for buying and selling the credits. So I just put this in here. This could be a takeaway for you. It'll have the type of program at the top, the type of entity on the side. And if it's a P, that means elective pay. If it's a T, that means transferability, it means you can sell it. Some of these programs are both. Carbon sequestration, advanced manufacturing, the CHIPS Act. Some of these you can be a for-profit and use elective pay, or the not-for-profits also get it. So I thought I'd cut to the chase and just show you a check, because this is it, the ultimate goal, how to go from project to check. Been working with for-profit clients for 20 years, and now getting into the not-for-profit space has been very, very exciting and gratifying work. And not many of our clients, take a selfie with a check and send it to us, how happy they are, but this one did. So I thought I'd share it with you, just to know that it does work. We are receiving checks 60 to 90 days after filing, tax-free money. This one's $2.8 million. And I'll show you a little bit more of how we got there. So here is, if you're larger, like this is for a university capital improvement plan. We have some of these for not-for-profit hospitals, which have a lot more opportunities for either geothermal or combined heat and power, waste energy recovery property, a lot more options for taking credits. But just on a larger scale, you can see even one entity could have multiple projects. So a parking structure could have solar on it, or student housing, it could be using thermal energy like a chiller to chill. The signs could be solar. This cogeneration or combined heat and power could be off of a laboratory. Student union could put in a geothermal system. Geothermal is very, very tried and true technology for heating and cooling buildings, and it qualifies until 2033 for this elective pay credit. Solar plus battery, we get a lot of solar and battery these days combined, so that'll be two separate assets, or thermal energy. So you can just see how the numbers can add up into refundable credits. So a couple more examples, and then I'll go into the mechanics. I know there's some Porty Brown employees on there as well, so maybe someone is gonna want to see some tax returns. So we'll get into that, but just really quickly, here's the different sizes. So this was a school up in Illinois, $4 million on a geothermal system. The credit was 30%. They did meet domestic content, did not get the energy and no bond financing, but they received their check back for $1.6 million. So a lot of what we do on these projects is figure out what is the eligible project basis. So this could have been a $6 or $7 million total project spend, but $4 million is what we put in that qualified basis. So a little bit more complicated project like this, we have to go in and say what is integral to the creation of the system, a renewable energy system, or what is functionally interdependent. And that way you get to add a lot more cost into that qualified basis. So looking at some other examples, this is a municipality, city of Wisconsin. They just put solar panels on the courthouse. Spent 347, got an $88,000 check. Here's a little bit bigger project we did, which this was a hospital in Minnesota, $150 million remodel. So they did a combined heat and power. They had waste heat. So what they did is they put a cogeneration system or combined heat and power. So they just captured the heat and generated electricity. And then they also did like their own microgrid. So both of those qualified as renewable energy property. And so of 30 million, they had a $9 million base, not $9 million base, and they got 30 million eligible project, 30% at 9 million. So they received a check for 9 million. So part of this project is going in. We tried to get domestic content and it just didn't work because there was a lot of moving parts. Just doing the cost segregation study on this one was pretty massive. But I just put some words in here like what is integral. If it's energy property, it's considered integral to the property, then you're gonna qualify it. And it's also helps you draw the delineation of what is on the qualified side, and then when does it start, when does it stop, based on the cost segregation study. And then functionally interdependent, that's just what components are dependent on each other. If the HVAC or the HVAC piping, tubing, conduits, if there's a lot of things you might consider not qualify for renewable energy, if they're considered dependent, if they're dependent on each other, then they're going to all be on the qualified side. So that was a really good project. Community centers of California, they were putting in $24,000 thermal energy units. They did it across 300 locations. So you can add them up, and you got to file a 990 on each entity. So we'll get to that in just a minute. Another one here, another geothermal heat pump, community center. This was really cool. It was a community center, but it had like a STEM research portion to it. So youth would come in and they'd go through the STEM programs. And so when they built this community center, the STEM Learning Center, the geothermal heat pumps were on the other side of the wall. So they put a really big window. So all the children that are coming in and learning can actually look in and see like the geothermal piping. And they're like, well, how's that work? They're like, well, they bore down to the ground and they use the earth to heat and cool the building. It's like, mind blowing for these young learners. So anyway, that's why it's been cool doing some of this work. And also when the $840,000 check shows up, that's also awesome. So here's the process. So I explained before, you're going to be an applicable entity. If you're spending money or you're going to spend money on a renewable energy project, solar, wind, battery, thermal, any of these, you're going to be not-for-profit entity. Then you're going to have to go to the IRS portal registration separately and get that number. But at the end of the day, if you file a 990, and you have unrelated business income, that changes the equation a little bit. If you're a 990 and you don't have unrelated business income, then you file a 990T. And if you don't file a 990 at all, like most houses of worships don't, then you're just going to file the 990 and the 990T. And so all of this has to be done on a timely filed return. So, if you're on extension for the end of 25, you have the 5 months and 15 days. You can go on extension another 6 months. So technically, if you place in service, you can have 11 months and 15 days to file that 990T in order to still be eligible. If you're past that window, it's going to be out of the scope of limitations because you can't go back and amend. So timing is very, very, very important. And technically, if you have to file an extension for a 990 and the 990T to put it on extension to still be able to file the credit timely plus extensions. So that's just kind of a little bit of the mechanism of how it works. So if you're a tax exempt business income return, there will be a 30, you'll see it here, elective payment amount from $3,800 is the general business credit form. That's where R&D, WOTC, 45L, like most general business, most credits are going to be general business credits, 3,800. So what IRS did is they took that same form and said, well, generate the credit, put it on a general business credit, bring it over to the 990T and check that you're an applicable entity. And then, so what happens is you're going to file the 990T. The government receives it when they go to process it. They're like, oh, you have an $840,000 tax credit. I see that you're not a tax-paying entity. Therefore, it triggers a refund. That's how the refund check is printed and sent. So the mechanisms right here say, what is your elective pay amount? Again, the 3,800 will have the registration number from the IRS. So when they're processing it, they're going to go to the portal, look at the registration number, say, is it $840,000 credit? Yes, $840,000 credit. Issue the check. So it's administration is very important. Very, very important. And if you have a question, I don't know if this is a funny joke or not, but they came up with a really easy address here, irs.elective.payment.org. Transfer credits at IRS. So if you have a question, you can go to that simple email address and ask the questions. Our experience is we have communicated a lot with the IRS, but through the portal. So we'll say, we'll go with the client, walk through the portal, send the information, and the client will come back and say, proof of ownership, entity structure, like they'll ask questions like through the portal. It's not super easy getting someone on the phone. So this email, they do answer this email, but through the portal has been the most activities. So, I skipped, oh, nope, that was actually it. That's the end of my presentation. We have about 10 to 12 minutes left. We wanted to open it up, see if anyone had any questions. Let me see.
Yeah, I think,
okay.
Yeah, I'll just say a quick question for, I think you covered this to an extent, both of you, but maybe just share, like, what's your favorite success story that you've had with one of these, clients in terms of the energy credit? Maybe it's someone that was a really good candidate for it, or really saved a lot of money. There's big dollars here. So just maybe in a little different format than a case study.
I'll go first, Ryan, and I'll let you jump in. We have some clients that thought they were out of date and could not go back and get the credit. But when we looked and we started digging into what their actual placed in service date was, they had it, but there's like about 7 different factors on what constitutes placed in service. Whether is it available for its intended use? Is there a permission to operate? Is it generating renewable energy? Like how do you know what the placed in service date was? So when we dug in and did some of the technical review of the asset, the placed in service date ended up being in scope. So there was a client that originally thought they were going to lose, $500,000 of a tax-free cash rebate for something they already paid for, and we ended up getting to put it in time and get them the refund. So that was one example.
Yeah,
that's great, Ryan.
Yeah, I love projects where the tax credit, the new market tax credit truly makes it happen. So I worked on a project in Florida, a childcare center that has training for early learning teachers on site too. They bought an existing facility. They thought it was going to be like a $6-7 million project, and then with COVID era inflation, it ended up being a $12-13 million project. They had to fundraise a ton more money. But because they were able to access new market tax credits, they were able to get this project across the finish line. So it really just helped to supplement their traditional fundraising, and when we can really use the new market tax credits to enhance and allow projects to get across the finish line, super meaningful and makes a huge difference.
Awesome. We've had a few questions come in. One, this is fairly specific, so if it's better suited offline, please. But the question is, I work for an IRS VITA nonprofit site, which is essentially low income tax preparation. And would these credits apply if we wanted to set up our own proprietary facilities to host services they're currently using third-party in-kind space?
I would like to take that away to research it, but I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. It depends on your entity type. So if you're a separate not-for-profit entity, the answer would be yes. But I can take this away and get you a proper answer.
Perfect.
Yeah, the new market tax credit, and to the extent a new facility kind of has $5 million of total cost between acquisition, hard cost, soft cost, and is located in a new market eligible area, the profile of that project would be a good candidate for new market tax credits. I think it's just making sure the scale is big enough for it to make sense, and then the location as well.
Yeah. So yes on both.
Yep.
Yes on
and
both.
then
Perfect.
Then a couple more questions. Can the programs be used to finance office equipment?
I think for the new market tax credit, not by itself, unless you're spending $5 million on office equipment, which I don't think most folks are. But we often see if you're building a new kind of capital project and there's a few $100,000 of office equipment, new desks, new security, technology, things like that, all of that is eligible, but not exclusively kind of on its own, which the scale isn't big enough, but as part of a broader capital spend, definitely office equipment is eligible for new market tax credits.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Those are all the questions that we have that have come through. Ryan, Barry, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I think it really highlights for anyone considering these type of projects, especially if you're considering, big real estate purchase, significant investment into existing buildings. I would stress as a third party, it really is helpful. You need to have an expert who specializes in this area behind you in order to be successful, or it's just not going to happen, right? These are very intricate credits, very complex programs, but extremely, extremely lucrative if you qualify. So super helpful. Really appreciate both of your expertise. And thank you everyone who attended, as well. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to attend. And we are always more than happy if anyone has any follow-up questions. All of our contact information has been shared. So, feel free to follow up with us at Porty Brown, or to the extent you have specific questions on one of the programs with Ryan or Barry directly as well. That concludes our
Thank you for having us
today. Thanks
so
everyone.
much.
Okay.